So welcome back to the barn project here at His Nature. I wanted to give you kind of a little bit of an introduction to to us building some walls. So we got our deck down, as you can see, and I think I may have mentioned we only have done 2 sections so far of the floor. There's 3 sections. They're 16 feet wide by 52 feet deep, and we've done 2 of them, and we have 1 more to go. And we didn't do that, and I kind of mentioned it because we're going to get a lull, a crane in here so we can do some of our headers. But let's talk about here what we have, and we have some of our framing. Now, this framing here is, there's a couple things to consider when we're framing. First thing is how tall are our interior walls going to be? In other words, how tall is our interior partitions, meaning we have a ceiling height of 10 feet on these plans. So how tall do these walls need to be? Well, of course, 10 feet, right? But there's compensation. It's actually 10 feet, 1/2 inch. And if you're going to consider the finished floor, it could be another 3/4 inch on there. So it could be 10 feet, 1 1/4 inch, if that's right. I think I got that right. And we're not going to get that exact. What we did is we framed these up so our finished ceiling height is exactly 10 feet from the subfloor. Okay. Now you may not think that that's important, but it kind of can be important, particularly on lower level roof systems, so ceilings heights. So for example, up here we're going to have, we'll kind of do a video on that. Up here we're going to have 9 foot. And this is going to be a second story in the middle. We're going to have 9-foot ceilings on here. Very important to frame that right. Why? Well, if you're doing drywall, that drywall is pre-sized to be, the width I think is 54 inches. I think that's right. And that width is designed for a 9-foot ceiling. So if you don't do that exactly right, you could pretty much be cutting all your drywall. And it could, whether you're doing it or someone else is doing it, it's just more work, more taping potentially, but a lot more work as you're cutting everything. So that's the reason why you want to get your measurements down. On a 10-foot ceiling, not quite the same. It's not as common. So here we have a 10-foot height here, which when we first put it down, I was shocked at, I'm like, that's really tall. But being that this side particularly is going to be, and actually the whole building, but this side in particular is going to be our shop, so it's going to be a barn, but it's going to have a wood shop in it. Being that we're going to do that, we really like the high ceilings. You know, you're moving stuff around. If you're working with like 8-foot doors or, you know, or even a table or something, you're moving stuff around, not only do you need surface area or a large footprint, but you also need some height. Sometimes you're tipping stuff up and it's, you know, you can hit the ceiling. So a 10-foot ceiling height is good. Not to mention if you obviously have a regular barn or shop, you're bringing in equipment and that sort of thing. But with our framing, let's talk about this real briefly. So we're just using 2x4 framing, not going crazy. We can do 2x6. We can do all that, increase our sizes for our insulation. Being in the south pretty much here, not so much about heat, but it is because it does get cold here. Outside of Nashville, we have below 0 days, absolutely, at times. So it would be nice. This is designed for an R13 insulation. Now, we could go to a larger, deeper cavity by using 2x6s, but the extra cost here wasn't worth it. This is mainly a shop. We're going to have, yes, we are going to have some living space, but we felt that cost-wise and everything else, we really wanted to go with just a 2x4 material. And that's what this is here, 2x4. And we space everything, of course, 16 inches on center, as most framing is done. We typically, as you may see right here, we got a 2x10 header, which goes on the load side of the roof. The roof is going to have, we're going to have a, obviously we're going to have a truss roof system here, which is a 4.5, 12 pitch, and we'll talk about that when we do it. But our load is going to be here on this wall, because these are the outside walls. So if you have some snow, which you don't have much, the load is going to be here over these windows. That's what these headers are for, okay? This is a double 2x10. Now, honestly, it's probably a bit overkill. We probably didn't need a 2x10, but we had the 2x10s because that's what we use for our floor joists. So we just used the cutoffs and used that for our headers over our windows. the design of our windows, when you're thinking about windows too, another thing you need to think about is the height of the windows. Now we plan this that you can put in front of this a countertop that's at 36 inches tall. We wanted it so if you did a counter, the window wasn't big enough as far as being low enough that it interfered. So we put this window here at this height so we could just put our counter just below it. Again, you never know what you're working on. We're talking about doing a paint room in here and stuff like that. You may have some countertops against the windows. And of course, with a paint room, staining and stuff like that, you really like a lot of natural light. You don't want a lot of shadows, so natural light always helps for that. So these windows are pretty big. They're 34 inches wide by 40 inches tall. Pretty good size window, single hung window for these. So anyway, we did that. We're starting to frame that. And what we did is I like symmetry when I do a building. And as I said, I may have mentioned before, I do stuff sometimes, I design it as I'm building it sometimes. It's a lot easier to visualize. And we made changes here. We did stuff on the plans that we said, hey, you know what, we're gonna do something a little different here. Like, let me show you over here real quick. So this room here originally was gonna be for our utility room. I may have mentioned earlier, being off grid, you need a large area for utility because we're gonna have solar and we're gonna have water collection, not inside, but treatment for filters and carbon filters and everything else. So that becomes a factor, and you want a large area. So we created this, if you could tell, we framed this with a design that the interior space on this wall, as you see there's 3 studs here, the interior space is going to be 5 feet. But you know what, after building it, what happened? We said, you know, we really need a half of 3/4 bath here on this floor in this area. So we're going to make this a 3/4 bath now, and then we're going to make our utility room a lot bigger. We're going to probably encompass a lot of this area here because we are now thinking, well, what if we have freezers, for example, like we usually buy a cow when we get our meat for our family, or if you have venison, you know, you get a couple of deer. We need some large freezers to keep that. Well, where are you going to put it? You're not going to put it in your kitchen. So we need to have spaces for some freezers. Shelving, additional shelving, right? For if you're going to buy some bulk items, right? Where are you going to put all that? So you can put it in your kitchen, but in this building, the kitchen's not that large. So these are the things that we are considering when we're building this utility space. So this utility space is going to be quite large. Probably encompass most of this 13 by 16 foot wide space with a bathroom in it. So it's going to be a little different, but it's something that we think is probably going to work out well. Again, didn't realize it until we started doing it that we're going to need the space, and the configuration has had to change a little bit. So that's kind of where we are. So right now we're over here. And we're going through, we're framing our walls. We do it in sections. This is 48 feet long. Obviously 10 foot tall, 48 feet long, and you'll see it on some of the video here in a minute. We're gonna frame the wall on the floor and then lift it. Well, when you're lifting up a section that's 10 feet tall, once you go beyond about 12 feet, it gets really heavy. We did the rear wall, 16 feet long by 10 feet tall. Even it doesn't seem like a whole lot, it's a lot to lift, particularly because of the height. So we built this in 12-foot sections. So we built 12 foot, 12 foot, and we built this as 12 foot. Now here, what we got going on here, this is just going to be a larger area to take in and out, either if we're working on some small equipment, bringing in some lumber, getting stuff out of here. This is a large room. We're going to have barn doors on here. It's 8 feet wide by 7.5 feet tall. We could have went up to 8 feet, 9 feet. We didn't feel like we felt that was a little overkill. So it's 8 feet wide, 7.5 feet tall. Today we're going to be framing right here. We're going to be framing this last 10 foot section here and put a window in here. We hope to frame the entire front today. Again, more complex the front. Why? We're going to have more windows. We have 2 windows here. We have a center door here. We have 2 windows on that side. So it's a lot more involved when you're doing something like that. You got to cut headers and that sort of thing. So thanks to my family who's here again, as there always are, very dedicated to helping us frame this today. We got a beautiful day because it's cloudy, and we like cloudy days. A little wet, but much easier to work than yesterday, which was crazy. So anyway, we'll see you soon. You could watch us go ahead with these walls, and we'll get right to it. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to frame in a window. Something the way I do it. You may do it differently. Definitely, there are many guys on YouTube and stuff that probably do it way better than I do. But this is how I do it. Essentially, what I'll do is we lift the wall up without the window in there, meaning the actual particular framing for the window. We just frame out for the width of the window roughly prior. Well, let me show you what we call these. These we call king studs. Essentially, on this we do a jack stud. Now, what's that? Let me show you. So over here, here's a finished window of what we're exactly doing. The king stud, the jack stud. Why do we call them a jack stud? Really simple, because this holds up what we call our header. So we call this a jack stud. There's different names throughout the country for them, but we don't put this jack stud or this header in or this sill in until we're done, until we have the wall raised. Why? Well, because these are heavy. Also, it's a little more difficult to get it level, making sure that everything's right when it's just sitting laying on the ground. So I always want to frame that after I have the wall raised. So let's go back over here. Now, I don't know if you may have seen the video earlier, but we were straightening this out a little bit. We had a big bow in this right here, and on a window, these are pretty important to be straight, particularly on these on here, because this one is where your window, when it's mounted in, when it's installed, this needs to be pretty straight, because ultimately this window here, this is where the window's going to go, so you want it to be pretty plumb. So meaning you don't want it crooked, you don't want any big bows in here. I don't want to be sticking anything in here causing this to bow out. We want this straight. So if this is straight, our jack stud is going to get attached to here. So how do we do that? Well, as far as getting the heights and everything, really simple. I go from the finished floor, well, not finished floor, subfloor, and I go up 80 inches. Why 80? Because 80 is the standard height. Header height for all doors and all windows is 80 inches. So I get 80 inches on both sides, essentially. Now, obviously, that should be level. If our floor is level, that should be level. I know our floor is level, so I'm pretty positive that that's level. So what we do then is we want to measure the height of these jack studs, not from the floor, but from the bottom plate, because this is where the jack stud is going to sit. So obviously, if it's 80 inches, it should be, if this is 1.5 inches, it should be 78.5 inches. That's a rough guess, but I'm pretty sure that's pretty accurate. 78.5, pretty exact. So 78.5, and I know both of them, we're going to need two of them. So we need two jack studs at 78.5 inches. So I'm going to cut them. Once I get them put in, I'm going to measure for our header. That's the length of our header. Again, two double 2x10s, and we'll get that going